So here we are, another Brit at the podium. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy, for those kind and somewhat embarrassing words. And thank you especially to Michael and to your colleagues at the ZFA for bringing us all together. It really is a wonderful and much needed experience. We come together, and even though we come from all over this vast country and we're used to working in our individual schools and our individual departments, we come together and we find out we're not alone. And we find out that others are grappling with the same problems that we do, and sometimes they're meeting the same solutions or failing to find the same solutions, and that validates us. And sometimes they're finding different solutions and they share that, and that empowers us. And coming together and seeing so many Jewish educators in one forum reminds us, and I want to put this as delicately as possible, reminds us that we're the best. That what we do is the most worthwhile thing that anyone can do. What we do as teachers, as educators, is inculcate values to the next generation to help them grow and help them learn. And what we do as Jewish educators, inculcating Jewish knowledge, Jewish values, Jewish experiences, does nothing less than build the Jewish future. Because despite what distorted and oversimplified readings of the Genoate survey may say, amongst all the factors that ensure Jewish continuity, surveys from all over the world conclude enrollment in a Jewish day school is the one that does the most. And we can be very proud of what we have here in Australia. It is no coincidence that we live in a vibrant and thriving Jewish community, and it's a Jewish community with very strong youth groups and a community with amongst the highest level of enrollment in Jewish day schools to be found anywhere in the diaspora. And you know what? We're getting better. We're reaching higher levels of professionalism. We're applying more systematic curriculum development to ensure that we get it right. And we are all giving greater priority and greater resources to experiential and informal Jewish education, to build the entire Jewish personality of our students. And so there is so much of which we can be proud. And yet, there is so much more that we need to do. And I want to talk amongst the many possible avenues of challenges and opportunities out there. I want to talk about three things. And a lot of what I'm going to do is to raise questions which won't necessarily have answers, at least not from me. But I want to talk about our teachers, I want to talk about our teaching, and then I want to talk about a particular elephant in the room, which is actually an existential threat to our future. So let's start by talking about teachers. They're hard to find. Harder than perhaps ever before. Now, I don't think this is a unique Jewish problem. It's hard to find maths teachers, it's hard to find teachers of any subject, and it's hard to find Jewish studies and Hebrew teachers. But because it affects Jewish teachers, Jewish studies teachers, it's actually more important. And I say that as a maths teacher. Because our raison d'etre as schools, our raison d'etre as organizations, is to teach Jewish studies, to teach Jewish life, to teach Hebrew in the best possible way. And if we can't find the high-quality teachers, if we can't find the native speakers of Hebrew to do that, then we have a problem. So what can we do to get more people into teaching? Well, one way would be to double the salaries. And even though doubling the salaries would bring the reward closer to commensurate to the contribution that our teachers make to the community, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for reasons which I will come to later. But perhaps we can do something about the status of teachers. You know, if there were an Olympic sport in teacher bashing, we know who would get the gold medal. And we know what effect it has not only on us as teachers, but on the future of our profession, when our students, when sometimes our own children, hear the low status that teachers have from parents and from the community. Now, what can we do about that? Well, one thing we can do is ensure that our community leaders, our newspapers, our rabbis, the lay leadership of our schools talk up teachers and talk of the contribution that teachers make that nobody else can. Another thing we can do is to make sure that we are as professional as possible and never let ourselves and our colleagues down. And another thing we can do possibly, and this brings me on to my next point, is develop more of a career path for our teachers. Now, a career path is difficult in every school. Schools, by definition, are somewhat pyramidal, and the number of positions gets fewer as one goes, if you'll pardon the phrase, upwards. And it's actually wonderful that many teachers find total fulfillment doing what they do best, which is teaching. However, it is a reflection of something that relatively fewer of our Jewish studies teachers go up into middle management, into senior management, into principalship, than do our general studies teachers. It's a pretty bad reflection that often for senior positions, our schools have to look overseas, to the other side of the world, to places like Great Britain, to find people to come and lead our schools. Why aren't we developing our own Australian talent? Are we doing enough to ensure that our teachers, our Jewish studies teachers, our Hebrew teachers, if they so want, are given the training, are given the experience to go into management and to go into leadership? Are we doing enough to give them the career structure, which, amongst other things, could attract more graduates into teaching, and perhaps also raise the status of teaching itself? But there's something more that teachers themselves can do to raise their status and their own professionalism. I said earlier that it's great that we come together and we talk to each other and we empower each other. What's particularly heartwarming is attending sessions and seeing teachers teach others. And perhaps more heartwarming still is to look at it from the other perspective and seeing teachers learning from others and learning with others. And why this session, these 2 days are so precious is because it's one of the few opportunities we get as teachers to become learners. In the second paragraph of the Shema that we happen to read from the Torah just last Shabbat, we have the phrase, you shall teach your children so that they should then talk of words of Torah. But probably for us as educators, our source text comes from the first paragraph of the Shema. That as it happens, we read the previous week in Shul. Because there the corresponding verse is slightly different. V'shinantam levanecha. You shall teach your children. And our sages say that the word levanecha there refers to our students. And we're talking not about parents teaching children, but about teachers teaching students. And after the words v'shinantam levanecha comes the words v'dibarta bam. And you, the teacher, should continue to talk in words of Torah, even after and independently of the lesson that you have given to your students. Teachers, the best teachers, model learning. And the best Jewish studies teachers model Jewish learning. We need to keep up to date with pedagogy, just like we'd expect our doctors and our airline pilots to keep up to date with the latest developments in their professions. But more than that, we need to model learning. We need to be Jewish learners. And so, it's a shame that we have to wait 2 years for another conference like this. I was just trying to persuade Jeanette to have another one in a year's time. But even more than that, let us leave this conference resolve to create and develop professional learning communities, not only in our schools, where there's a lot of work already happening, but between our schools and for us as individuals and for us as a community, so that we can be the best possible teachers by being the best possible learners. Let me move on to the subject of what we teach. First thing I want to say is on the subject of teaching Israel, which is a vital part of our work as schools, as Zionist schools. I think we have to ask ourselves two fundamental questions. And if you like, the second question is, what are we trying to convey, what are we trying to build our students into when it comes to Israel? Because under the surface of any discussion about Israel teaching is, what impact should political questions have on the way that we teach? In other words, are we trying to raise a generation who will be critical friends of Israel or passionate devotees? I'll exclude the possibility of just being critics, which is what some people would want us to be. But that's the second question, because the primary question is, what is the purpose of our Israel teaching? And I think that's the one we have to answer first, and I sense that we haven't fully answered it. To me personally, the purpose of our Israel teaching is to convey to our students that Israel is the center of Jewish life today, and that therefore Israel is part of their life, and that also Israel is a place that may be their own personal destiny. And from that would come particular ways in which we should deal with our topic of educating about Israel, and how we present to our students the political questions, the warts and all approach, or whatever that comes to teaching Israel. But it seems to me that until we've fully defined where we stand on what is the purpose of our Israel education, why we do it at all, only then can we answer the question, which I sense we haven't answered yet, of what type of connection to Israel and to Israeli society and to Israeli problems do we want our students to have. The next issue is the role of technology in our teaching. As we know, technology has transformed our students' lives. In many ways, it's transformed our lives. It's just beginning to transform our classrooms. And there is no question that we must keep pace with developments in technology, partly to keep pace with our students and to reduce the dissonance between their life inside and outside the classroom, but more importantly, so that we can be sure we're taking advantage of everything that's out there that's going to help our teaching. As long as the learning drives the technology and not the other way around, we should be as open as possible, budgetary constraints allowing, to devices in the classroom, to individual devices which provide content, which store content. And we should be very well aware of the apps and the programs that are out there which can enhance and insist our Jewish studies. The C in ICT stands for communication. As we speak, the top universities in the world are putting more and more of their courses online. One of my greatest teachers used to run a yeshiva. He now runs something called Web Yeshiva. One of my friends sits in his house in Seattle, Washington, and he gives shiurim to classes around the world, and they're interactive. And when people have a question, they put up their hand from wherever they happen to be in the world, and he stops the shiur and he answers them. It's not so much the way of the future, to some extent it's the way of the present. There were those who said that the technological revolution will render the need for a teacher something in the past. But that hasn't happened, and I don't believe it ever will happen. Because education will always be based around that nexus of an individual relationship between a student and their teacher. But you know what? It may be that the teacher doesn't have to be physically in the same room. And it may be that we should be open to ideas that the teacher, if it's the best available teacher, might be in Jerusalem or might be in New York. It's not the same, but it might be worth exploring. Now, because of a time difference, probably the teacher or the students will have to be in their pajamas, but we can sort that out. Although, of course, that's not the only model, because we could have a teacher somewhere in Australia teaching a class in another school at the same time. although that would require schools to collaborate with each other, which we're not so good at. So we'll probably have to stick to the pajama model. But it may be that we and our students and our parents, both by necessity and opportunity, have to be open to such developments. And let me move on to the main issue of the content of which we teach. There's something that was mentioned in the Gen 08 survey, and we hear from time to time, particularly from some of our recent graduates, and they say they are Jewed out. That we've, for the past 15 years or so, given them so much Jewish knowledge, Jewish experiences, they've gone to a youth group, and now, because they've had so much, they are Jewed out, and they rush to non-Jewish society, non-Jewish activities, and sometimes they become amongst the increasing proportion who disengage and disappear. And it's all our fault. I don't buy that. That's an excuse. It's a cop-out. If I live my life surrounded by messages about healthy eating, and I'm given very many opportunities to buy and eat nutritious, healthy food, and I choose, as I sometimes do, to binge out on chocolate, I don't turn around and blame the healthy food messages for giving me healthy fooded out. The reason I binge out on chocolate is because I like the chocolate. However, that metaphor can be stretched a little bit further to say, if, however, the healthy food on offer were bland, unappealing, and unattractive, then maybe I have a little bit of an excuse as to why I eat the chocolate. I don't want to repeat the 40 minutes of address that I gave from this very platform 2 years ago. You can see it on YouTube. But I will sum it up in a couple of sentences. But you can still see it on YouTube. It's called Why Be Jewish, or Rabbi Kennard, or look for that, you'll find it. I had to put it up there in 3 pieces, which is interesting because I can see those who actually made it through to the 3rd and final section. But I recommend it, I think. Anyway, what I said then is what I say now, that we live in an age, for the first time ever, where being Jewish, staying engaged with the community, and creating a Jewish home and a Jewish future is no longer a default option. We have to give our students positive reasons to opt in to Jewish engagement. In other words, the most fundamental Jewish question we have to answer today is simply, why should I stay Jewish? Or in particular, why should I marry Jewish? Why should I engage Jewishly? And I believe the answer has to be some combination of telling our students that engaging with Jewish life is beautiful. It represents, at some level, a truth. And I didn't say this last time, I've added this, it gives meaning to their lives. And if our Jewish studies, if our Hebrew, if our Jewish experiences that we have in our schools are not addressing those points, are not giving answers to the question, why stay Jewish, then we are not fulfilling our responsibility. That's a big task. It's a big challenge. But the fact that it's big is no reason to shirk it. And we have to be aware, whatever we teach and however we teach, teaching text, for instance, which is the core of Jewish learning, which is the real type of Jewish learning, if you like, for the people of the book, can be a challenge for those students who do not find it relevant. It can be a challenge for those students whose intellectual affinity doesn't lend them to that sort of study. We have to make sure that in everything we teach, we are not offering something that is bland and unappealing and unappetizing, which would then justify the complaint that our students become Jewed out. But we are giving them so many reasons to stay Jewed in. Incidentally, one of the particular challenges that we have that was mentioned in the Generate survey, and sometimes not only is identified as one of the reasons why our kids are Jewed out, but it comes from the very source that is the problem, namely the lack of support from our parents. Sometimes it's our parents who say, but you're turning our children off, when in fact, they should look at themselves. I'll say that in the nicest possible way. So how do we deal with this problem? Because it's our problem. We need to do so much more with our captive audience, and not our captive audience of students, but our captive audience of parents. We as schools are the institutions that our parents have more contact with than any other institution in the Jewish community. They pay their fees, and I'll come to that soon. They send their children to us 5 days a week. They come to parents' evenings, they come to school events, much more than they go to anywhere else in the Jewish community. We need their support, and we need to engage them, and we need to educate them, and we're educators, so we should be able to do that. We need to develop our schools more as communities, because we're the best place to do it. We have the opportunity, and we have the skills. And we need to find more ways to educate our parents, to help them grow, and so that they, together with us, can help our children to grow. And now let me come to the elephant in the room. What is it that threatens the future of our wonderful Jewish day school movement? It is the crippling burden of fees that so many of our families are suffering under. You know why school fees are high? Because it costs a lot to run a school and to educate our children. And you know why school fees go up every year? Because our costs go up every year. It's as simple as that. And by the way, the vast majority of our cost goes on salaries. So most people in this room will be happy that we devote more to salaries every year. But most people in this room, who might also be parents at Jewish day schools, feel the other side of that very same equation. There is no doubt that more and more families are finding it harder and harder, and sometimes it puts terrible strain on the families to send their children to Jewish day schools. There is no doubt that some of our schools are actually seeing this. The number of parents who think that they can manage without a Jewish primary school and the kids can catch up in secondary school is growing. There are some parents who tell me, and this is heartbreaking, but they deliberately choose to have fewer children because they know they can't afford the fees. Others are now proclaiming that you can take a non-Jewish school, put a smattering of Hebrew lessons, which you have to pay for, into the curriculum. You have a little bit after school, and you say, and I quote, "This is equivalent to the experience in a Jewish day school." We know it is not. We know it never can be. Without Jewish education, without Jewish educators, without the hidden curriculum that comes through every week through the school timetable, that comes through every month through the school calendar, there is no way that anything can replicate the experience of a Jewish day school. And yet, for many reasons, and cost might only be one of those reasons, and it might be the only one they talk about, but nevertheless it makes no difference. For many reasons, our parents consider that they have a valid choice in the non-Jewish day school system. A message needs to go out from this conference to the leaders of our community, to those who can make a difference. And I would say the message has 4 parts. And the first is that this is a crisis for many Jewish families today. And the second is that therefore this is a crisis for the future of our community. Because we know that we are to some extent the last bulwark which confirms the possibility of a Jewish future. And without us, there is much less hope, there is no hope. And the third thing to say is that this is not a problem for one school or another school, or even for all the individual schools. This is a problem for the community, and is a problem that the community needs to fix. And the fourth call is to say, it can be fixed. It can be fixed very simply. It's just going to take a lot of money. We don't need commissions and inquiries and lots of people thinking about it to reach that conclusion. It's just going to take a lot of money. And the community as a whole, and those who can make a difference, are going to have to decide, is this a priority? Is this the priority for the future of our community, as I believe it is? Alternatively, we could wait another 20 years, and then I think if we do nothing, the problem will go away. Because with intermarriage already at 40%, if we do nothing in 20 years, the community, at least the community as we recognize it today, will also go away. The time for action is now. And if people can't see the crisis, maybe that's why the time for action is now, before we can all see the crisis before us. Let me conclude with the words of the Gemara in Ketubot, which tells the story of how Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Chia would argue. Two great giants of the period roughly between the Mishnaic and the Talmudic time. And the Gemara relates how when these two would have an argument in learning, Rabbi Hanina would say, "You're arguing with me? Let me tell you that if ever it happened, chas v'shalom, that the Torah would be forgotten from Israel, I would bring it back with my pilpul, with my brilliant analytical mind." And Rabbi Chia would say, "You're arguing with me? I would make sure that the Torah would never be forgotten from Israel in the first place." And let me tell you, said Rabbi Chia, what I did. I planted flax. And when the flax grew, I made nets. And with the nets, I trapped deer. And from the deer, I gave the meat to orphans, and from the hides, I made scrolls. And I went to a town, and I found 5 children. And I wrote on the scrolls the 5 books of the Torah, and I gave one to each. And I found 6 more children, and I taught to each one of the 6 Sedarim of the Mishnah. And I said to these children, until I come back, teach each other what you have learned. And the Gemara concludes that Rabbi Chia's contribution was the greater. We need our Rabbi Haninas. We need our scholars who dazzle us by their brilliance, who, if necessary, can restore the Torah. But even more, we need our Rabbi Chias. We need people to bear the great and noble title of teacher, of educator, who can teach children and who can help those children to learn and one day become teachers themselves. May it be that others give us the opportunity and the support, and that we find from within ourselves the inspiration and the dedication to continue to do our job, and thereby ensure that the Torah, and indeed what it means to be a Jew, is not forgotten from our people. Thank you very much.